Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my round 2 overview and analysis video of the LTA North Spring Playoffs. We have 2 series to cover in today's video, the big one, and then obviously one that is for elimination. So a lot on the line for the 4 teams that are going to be participating today, but you probably already knew that if you clicked on the video. I'm curious to know what you guys thought of these series. Did they go as you anticipated, or were you surprised by the outcomes? I'm curious, kind of just if you agree or disagree with some of the takes that I'm going to share throughout this video. Of course, let me know down in the comment section below. You guys have been very vocal in the comment section, which I love. I love hearing, different opinions. I'm certainly not saying that as a negative, so keep that up. Continue to let me know how you guys feel down in the comment section below, but I'm excited. I hope you guys are as well. Let's go ahead and get into things. If you are new here, what we're going to do is go series by series, talking about the advantages and disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each series that we cover, and of course at the end of the video we'll be updating the bracket and talking about the upcoming semi-final series that is left to cover. Again, after this video, it's going to be game by game here in the LTA. This is the final one where we're going to be overviewing everything from a series perspective, so this is really these teams' last chance to kind of leave their mark and kind of prove that they deserve to be considered in the upper echelon or deserve to be favored. Of course, for our second series that we're going to cover, it's an elimination series, so you gotta stay on your toes, but we'll get to that later on in the video. It's time to jump in to our first series of this past weekend, and really, this is the big one. Even though the second one definitely has more stakes on the line, with only one team making MSI from the LTA North, that means that it's not actually a qualification series in winners finals like it is for basically every other region. This is just to guarantee your spot in the finals. It's still a big deal, and it's the 2 best teams in the league going head to head. It's the number 1 seeded FlyQuest taking on the number 2 seeded Cloud9, and FlyQuest is going to pick up the 3-2 series win. You heard that right, 3-2 for the first time all year long. An LTA series has gone the distance. It's gone all 5 games. We have not been getting this at all so far in 2025. This is the first LTA North series to go to the 5th and final game, so we finally get to see some drafts go that far, which I think were really interesting to talk about, and obviously there's a lot to break down when it comes to this series. FlyQuest getting a pretty dominant 2-0 series lead at the start here, but Cloud9 making the comeback after Thanatos really takes over game number 3 on the Renekton, and then of course you have game number 4 where Blabber ends up with a gigantic play on the Skarner in the back half, and Sven is incredibly strong on the Sivir. You get into game 5 and things are pretty even, at least all things considered, in comparison to maybe some of the first games of the series. Thanatos in general was just awesome, but the problem is C9 just don't have the resources or the setup to be able to make this Zeri work, and Sven, quite frankly, was kind of useless in game number 5, and that meant that FlyQuest was able to take this series. Obviously, there's more to it than that, and we're going to break it down, but let's start with the FlyQuest section first and foremost. Of course, games 1 and 2, this team looked unstoppable. There was so much going right for this team throughout the first couple of games, and then they had to throw it away with a Nidalee in game number 3. If you've watched this channel at all, you know my feelings on Nidalee top. I don't think you pick it unless you're trying to lose the game. I actually think it accomplishes nothing. Like, I've talked about this very, very vividly. Like, even if you win and you're up in CS by, 30 or 40 CS, or even more than that, right? Like 100 CS even. Like, Nidalee doesn't do anything. The whole point of that is to turn the game into a 4v4, and in that case, is that even really worth it? Is putting Bwipo, who just came off of a dominant game number 2 on the set, is taking him out of the game on something like Nidalee for the later half, is that really worth it? Thanatos wasn't even out of the game. He dominated game 3 on the Renekton, so it just ended up being a bit of a problem, but outside of that, I think FlyQuest looked pretty good in this series. Again, also things to criticize in game 4, but specifically when you're talking about their wins, I hate to keep glazing this guy, but I've been so impressed with his tape throughout this year. Player of the series for me is going to go to Busio in the support position. I don't know why people don't like him as much as I do. I've honestly been very confused as to why the public opinion on Busio has not been this guy was MVP. To me, it was very clear this guy was the MVP. He was the best player on FlyQuest, who was the best team in the regular season. That's why they have the number 1 seed. And I think that there really wasn't a lot of argument for that for me. I know Inspired ended up winning it. I heavily disagree with Inspired being the one to drive this team's success. Bwipo, I think you could make a case for, right? I think there's something there. Thanatos was a player a lot of people threw out there. I liked Loki's contributions maybe a tad bit more in the regular season, just because when this team won, oftentimes Loki was the one driving them, even if Thanatos was more consistent in their losses. But Busio, to me, has been incredible throughout this year. I think he's made that leap that we've kind of been waiting for. The verbiage I've used around Busio has almost felt felt a bit insulting over the past couple of years. I've called him like the prototypical B+ player, somebody who's very good for his role and very good at the things that he does, but isn't going to be like a superstar. This has been like a superstar-esque spring split from him, and I think it continues here, specifically the Renata and the Leona game. Those are the two games that he's getting this player of the series for. I would argue that the Renata game in game 2 was the best game that anybody played in this series. I think that he just completely broke that game open, not only with the hostile takeovers, but with the way he played the early game with him and Masu playing the Kalista Renata lane into Lucian Milio. I think the ability for them to not only generate their lead, but to take over the mid game, I think was so ridiculously impressive, and you just have to give him a lot of credit for that. And the Leona in game number 5, I think, was also lockdown. Like, Zeri had no ability to play the game. You're looking at something like Akali coming out in the mid lane and not really having the pressure or the ability to kind of take advantage of this big frontline tank that can't die. It just set everything else up for the rest of the team. So for me, it was a very easy decision. Busio was my player of the series. Although I think there are some open debates. Broadcast ended up giving it to Quad. I can kind of understand that because Quad was such a big deal in game 5 on the Tristana in terms of the damage he was able to output. I don't think when you're looking at the series as a whole, I would necessarily look at Quad as player of the series. I think it's kind of difficult to look at his games 1 and 2 and say that he was the factor that ended up getting FlyQuest over the hump, but he still played pretty well. In this series, Masu has a ridiculously good scoreline. Part of that is just the AD carry role. Part of that is that Busio played incredibly well in this series and set him up in some pretty easy positions, specifically, like I said, in game 2 on the Kalista, but he still was fine and definitely better than Sven when it mattered the most. Sven was really bad in game number 5, which again, we will talk about. Bwipo was great throughout their wins and horrible in their losses. Just the general Bwipo experience. I think you could even make the argument that Thanatos was better than Bwipo in this series, but that's not because Bwipo was awful. Rather, I think that's because Thanatos was just insanely good for Cloud9. Again, outside of that game 2 on the Gwen where things just kind of fell apart overall for Cloud9, but I don't want to, make it seem like I don't like how Bwipo played. I think specifically the first half of the series, the Cho'Gath and the set in games 1 and 2 were really excellent from him. The Gragas was important in game 5. Inspired was good as well, but I don't know, man. I love Inspired as a player, and trust me, I'm on the train where I think he's the best Western jungler of all time. I've been glazing this guy for years. Anybody who's followed the channel knows I've been talking about Inspired in a high, capacity for a long time. I just haven't really seen it this split. I'm very confused that people are so on the MVP train. I think he's been very good. I just don't think he's been inspired. I don't think he's been the player that's been destroying games in the way that this guy has done super regularly. I think that kind of was the case again in this series. Blabber was really excellent in game 4 on the Skarner, and I think you're looking at a Neferi game, the one time they drafted to let him take over, and he didn't really get to do anything. I know the Lee Sin and the Xin Zhao, kind of fit that equation, but not as much in my opinion. So it just kind of is what it is. I'm going to be a little bit lower on where Inspired is at right now. I don't think his talent level is not MVP worthy. I still think he's a top 2 or 3 player on any given day in the LTA, full stop, but I just don't know if the production's been there in the same way that everybody talks about it. But that's just because I'm so high on other members of this team, right? Busio is somebody that I'm really going to start glazing on this channel if it continues to go this way. I think he's been unreal this year, and I think he was once again unreal in this series. And then for Cloud9 on the other side, some real big positives to take away from this. I think that there was so much good in their wins. Thanatos was incredible in this series, and I probably am just undervaluing what Thanatos is. He is clearly the most talented top laner in the league. I love Bwipo, and I think he's a very good player. Thanatos is probably better than Bwipo, just in terms of raw mechanics, and I think that opens up a lot for Cloud9. And honestly, every other player on this team had good moments in this series. Ven was incredible in game 4, kind of comboing off of Blabber on the Skarner, who of course, ran it down in the beginning of that game because that's what Blabber does. It's just natural to his sort of core. I saw someone say that Blabber is like the MLXG of North America, and honestly, I've never been able to stop thinking about that since. It's really kind of stuck in my brain, but he makes that gigantic game-winning impale at the end of the game on Skarner, and it's just, you forgive all of the sins before that, so Blabber and Sven linking up there. Vulcan was pretty good, at least in their wins on the Nautilus and the Rakan. I think that there were some moments where he could have been a bit more aggressive. Loki, in general, felt a bit irrelevant in this series. I think specifically in game 5, I am going to criticize the Akali pick because I think you're looking at a situation where you're clearly playing for your Zeri Lulu win condition, and Zeri never had a chance to play the game. If you maybe have Orianna or something else like that in the mid lane, I think it does open up the map a tad bit more, but they wanted to go for more damage. That's where the Akali comes in, and I think it just kind of let them down. But at the end of the day, somebody has to get done of the series, and that to me is going to go to the player who played the worst in the final game, and that is Sven, who just could not play the game. He was stepping up and getting caught out in some pretty big moments, and obviously obviously not all of it is his fault. This is a very difficult game to play for the Zeri, and I think a lot of people are going to rightfully point that out, but you just can't really have this kind of performance in game number 5. I think Blabber is to blame a bit in terms of how he set things up on the Sejuani. I think Vulcan didn't have the best game number 5 in the entire universe. Again, I've already blamed Loki. I think Thanatos was very good in game number 5, but Sven, to me, going 0-3 on Zeri just is kind of the epitome of why Cloud9 ended up floundering in that game. They put all their eggs in a basket that hadn't really been a win condition for them for a majority of the year, and it didn't really end up working out. So it's unfortunate for Cloud9. They came very, very close to a reverse sweep here, which would have been absolutely ginormous for them, obviously, in a lot of different ways, but they're going to have to move down to the lower bracket to take on the winner of the series we're going to talk about next, and FlyQuest is going to book their ticket to the LTA finals. This is obviously the outcome I predicted and anticipated. I didn't think it would even be this close. FlyQuest is the team I have as the best in the LTA by a pretty considerable margin right now, and I think it's really hard for me to imagine that whoever ends up coming out of that bottom part of the bracket, whether it's Cloud9 or whether it's the winner of Team Liquid and Shopify, which we'll talk about next, whoever that ends up being coming into the finals, I think FlyQuest is very clearly going to be favorites in that series, which means it's only a matter of time before they themselves end up undergoing some sort of massive collapse, but at least for now, everything is going right, and there's a lot of players on this team I'm really enjoying watching right now. But then moving on now down to our lower bracket matchup, and this was the elimination matchup. The winner moves on to take on Cloud9 in the semifinals that we will cover, of course, in the next video. The loser is done and dusted. They are out in 4th place. It was a matchup between the number 3 seeded Team Liquid and the number 4 seeded Shopify Rebellion, and somehow, someway, Shopify Rebellion picks up the 3-1 series win. I'm gonna be honest, this might be one of the bigger upsets of the year so far. Certainly not the biggest across the entire world or anything like that. Trust me, we'll get to the LPL video later on this week where we talk about WE versus Top Esports. I assure you it's coming, but this has certainly got to be one of the more surprising outcomes, at least in my opinion. I did not see this being possible for Shopify. The vibes have just completely turned. Demonte is genuinely the vibes god. Like, there's nothing else left to talk about when it comes to him as a coach. He has entered Shopify and immediately turned them into one of the best teams in the entire league, taking down the defending champions and knocking them out of the playoffs. And then for Team Liquid, man, they've thrown a lot of stuff at the wall and not a lot of it stuck, huh? I'm not going to criticize this organization too heavily for looking to upgrade Umti because I understand it. Like, I'm an Umti defender in terms of just what he's done this split, but in terms of, like, Umti as a career player, like, on Team Liquid in Winter, on Team Liquid last year, going back to his time on Bro in the LCK, I've been a huge Umti hater, basically my entire channel, like, history. I've talked about how Umti has this gigantic fan base, and I don't know if his gameplay has ever really been able to back that up, and so it makes a lot of sense for them to bring in someone like Yuji, who I think has been gigantic for, you know, Dragonsteel, Maryvale throughout, you know, the last couple of years. You know, he's been incredible for that team. The problem I have with this is that right now it doesn't feel like this team has taken the time to gel yet. Yuji feels pretty out of place in terms of how this team wants to play the game. He's playing a lot of, you know, setup champions, carries, things like Viego. This team's not really set up to do that. They want a facilitator in the jungle, and unless Core JJ is going to start getting infinitely more aggressive in the early game, I have a problem believing that things are going to get better for this particular, I guess, combination of players, which we will talk about. Also, you know, I'm going to get it out of the way now. Team Liquid 4th. Like, of course we should have seen this coming. The meme is back. The meme is alive and well. That's how you know North American League of Legends is back in full force. But let's talk about Shopify. First and foremost, player of the series, it's got to go to Palafox. Like, genuinely, there's no one else that it could even possibly go to. This guy dominated game number 1 on the Ahri. Maybe dominated is a bit of a strong word, but he was excellent in game 1 on Ahri. He was really good in game 4 on the LeBlanc. Like, when he's on Assassins, things open up for him. We talked about this when he was on Energy. We talked about this when he was on CLG. We talked about this when he was on Optic and Cloud9 in terms of their academy team so many years ago. When this guy gets to play these AP Assassins, he becomes, like, genuinely one of the best players in North America. I don't care how relevant or meta valuable, you know, picks like LeBlanc are right now. I know people question whether or not LeBlanc can be a valuable champion in the meta because if she's not blowing somebody up, she doesn't really do a whole ton right now. But if Palafox is going to look so much better on these champions than he is on basically anything else because it's his bread and butter and always has been his bread and butter, then just let him freaking play it. Like, I don't understand why we need to fit him into the mold of every other mid laner and let him play Talia and Ryze and all these things. You flex Ryze up to the top lane and let Fudge play it because he's clearly better at Ryze has than Palafox is. This was just honestly getting back to basics for Shopify, and Palafox has been unreal good for this team over the course of their playoff run so far. Like, he has genuinely been this team's best player in the playoffs, and I think that that is just crazy impressive. Now, he's not the only player who can get player of the series here. I think it has to go to the top side, but who on the top side is kind of up to you. I went with Palafox because I think there were 2 games that you could really talk about him dominating in. But I think in terms of Fudge and Contracts and these players that are still playing excellently, you can still point out their valuable cases to this. Contracts was the best player in the closeout game in game number 4 on the Neferi. I think he was the most valuable player in that game in terms of what he was able to set up and how much he was able to do into Yuji on the Viego, who was the only one with any gold on the side of Team Liquid. And then you can talk about Fudge taking over not only, most of the series just being better than Impact, because he absolutely was and he has been for most of this year, even if you want to talk about Fudge being quite bad. I think he's been better than Impact, but specifically watching him in game number 2 on the Aatrox, that's where he really was able to step up and really push forward in this game. So I'm just crazy impressed with the top side of the map. Fudge feels reinvigorated, like the Fudge factor is absolutely back. C9 Fudge has returned and reconnected to the Rift, and this is the player I thought they were getting all along in the top lane. I never felt like Fudge kind of fell off on Cloud9. Do I think he got worse? Yes, but do I think he crashed into the abyss before he came to Shopify? No, I was really surprised to see this guy play so poor, but with some mental back and, just generally playing more confidently against a top lane field that's not very good right now. In the LTA, it looks like he does feel at least, closer to top 4, where he absolutely should be. And Contracts has just been good all year long. He's been hyper consistent for a team that's had absolutely no consistency, and so it's about damn time that the rest of the team ends up stepping up in the same kind of way. And it's nice to see him be able to take a secondary role in some of these games on things like Sejuani, on things like Jarvan. You love to see him be able to feel comfortable playing facilitators and not feel like he has to carry every single game like he did for Shopify for a majority of this year. So the top side of the map, definitely the standouts. B-Boy and Seos were fine. Seos in particular had some really nice moments. B-Boy is a psychopath. This guy's gonna die 90% of the time. His positioning is just criminally bad at points, but man, he plays aggressive and he's gonna do a lot of damage in these fights. He's just often going to trade his life to do so, which isn't always entirely worth it. But Shopify just feel on fire right now, and getting them into top 3, this team getting top 3 at all, if you would have told me that at the beginning of the year, I would have been I could see it. I'm certainly not expecting it, but I could see it. You told me that a month ago, I would have said you're an absolute moron and that you should make that bet with me so that I can make a bunch of free money. Obviously, I would look like an idiot. So it's really cool to see this team get there. And then for Team Liquid, I don't really know what else to say. When it comes to this team, there's a lot to digest when it comes to their individual performances, but a lot of it I've already talked about. I've talked about the inherent inconsistency of players like Impact, who have been pretty awful for basically all of 2025. This guy is just hemorrhaged resources on the top side of the map. He's losing every single game in terms of CS and gold, and obviously that's not everything. If you're a good team fighter, you can make up for it, but when you're losing as hard as Impact is and you're not really making team fight impacts, it's just a big problem, and he's my dud of the series. I don't think he was the biggest problem here, or maybe he was, right? It's hard to tell because Team Liquid in general more had team failures than they did individual player failures, but to me, not having a player on the top side who can survive is a big problem, and Fudge was way better than Impact in this series, which I think really let the team down. I would have given dud of the series to APA for, basically his entire series outside of the Taliyah game, but he was so good on Taliyah that I just can't justify it. The 11 kill game ends up saving him from dud of the series. Outside of that, he would have easily gotten it because Palafox abused him in games 1, 2, and 4, which is really not the place for APA to be. He's been probably this team's best player in terms of consistency this split, maybe outside of Umti again, just because I'm higher on his performances, but APA has been kind of the guy. He's just had a lot of brutal losses, and this was another one where you just can't be worse than Palafox in a best of 5 in the playoffs. It's pretty much unacceptable, and getting blasted on things like Nico and, especially the Ziggs in game 4, it's just really disappointing. Yawn, I don't think really stepped up here today. The dude was doing basically nothing. He got a signature champion in game number 2 on the Aphelios. I love Yawn, and I think this guy's incredible, but I don't know, he might be mental boomed. He felt a little lackadaisical today, more so than usual. Core had some incredible engages in game 3, and that's really what kept him out of the dud of the series conversation. He was pretty awful in game 4 on the Leona. Not entirely his fault. Sometimes the setups are just kind of bad, and he was exceptionally good in their win, but it's just one of those things where it's you look at Yuji and you look at him playing Viego and you look at him playing Xin Zhao and Wukong and you're like, all right, well, you're seeing Sejuani and Jarvan and Poppy on the other side of this matchup. If you're a team that's able to function with those champions a little bit more effortlessly, maybe you have a better time being able to enable your carries in this series because you didn't really have any opportunity to do so That's where the UMT conversation comes in. I had people in the comments telling me last week that, oh, they just felt Yuji was better for the matchup against, who did they end up playing? Dignitas. Yuji was better for the matchup, and so they kept him in for that series. Yuji was not better for this matchup against Contracts. UMT absolutely would have been better in particular in this matchup, and that's what confirms to me that this is not a 6-man rotation. They want Yuji to be the full-time starter here in the jungle. I just don't know if that's going to make their team better right now. Unfortunately, they're not going to have any more games in the spring split to test out their theory because they are eliminated. Coming back for summer, I'm very intrigued on what this roster is going to look like, whether or not there's going to be more changes or whether or not it's just going to be a full 5-man roster with Yuji starting full time with the hopes that they're going to be able to get it together. I think that could be the right call. Again, if Yuji continues to grow, he's absolutely better than UMT. I think he's a more talented player than UMT, and I think he should be better on this team than UMT is. I just think right now, in terms of the way things are set up, it's a bit difficult to project that. And then for Shopify on the other side, man, this team is just on a miracle run right now. I don't really know what this turns into, if it turns into anything for them. I think it's pretty realistic for them to just get blasted by Cloud9 and then go back to being a mid-table team for a majority of summer. But the fact that they got top 3 in the spring split after being so hopeless for a majority of this year is already just so fun, and it's such a great storyline. I'm happy for these players, and players like Palafox, Fudge, like they were playing for their jobs. They might have just saved them over the course of these past couple of weeks, and I certainly don't think there's going to be any major changes going into summer, even if this team gets blasted in the semifinals. All right, but that is going to do it for my LTA North round number 2 overview and analysis video. Up on the screen, the updated bracket after round number 2. You can see the 3 teams that remain. FlyQuest having won winners finals, of course, punched their ticket to the grand finals, to the LTA North finals, where you still have to win that. It's not like every other region that we've talked about where getting to finals qualifies you for MSI. Only one team from the LTA North is going because they share the other slot with the LTA South. Definitely a bit of an unfortunate circumstance, but it is the way that it is. It means Fly certainly is not off the hook just yet. Of course, the next series that we're going to be talking about on this channel is Cloud9 versus Shopify Rebellion in the semifinals. This is a very fun one to talk about, and honestly, I think it's going to be kind of interesting. I think if Palafox can step up and even be better than someone like Loki, because I think it's pretty realistic to say that Palafox has been better than Loki in this playoff run in particular, things get very intriguing. Also, some fun narratives. Of course, you've got some former Cloud9 players, Contracts coming up as a Cloud9, Academy jungler, kind of being the one to, I don't want to say replace Meteos, but kind of fill in the shoes of Rush and Meteos during that era where they were looking for a new jungler. And then, of course, Fudge on the top side, a longtime Cloud9 player going up against their former organization. It's a very fun storyline, and I'm excited to see how things break down. That being said, Cloud9, if they don't win this, that is a gigantic disappointment. This Shopify run would turn into like Golden Guardians level of insane. That Golden Guardians team that ended up making finals and going to MSI, like that version of that team, like that's how crazy it would be if Shopify ended up making finals, maybe even more so than that team. But, Cloud9 definitely are favorites going into this, and I'm projecting a 3-1 series. I think Shopify is just on fire right now, and I would expect them to take at least one game. Somebody's going to pop off, whether it's Palafox or Fudge or Contracts or maybe even B-Boy. Like, someone's going to pop off in one game, but Cloud9 is simply too good to drop this series. If they do, that's a huge issue for Cloud9, and that makes the finals even crazier because it would be definitely not the projected one. But let me know if you agree or disagree with my projection down in the comment section below, and that's going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. Of course, we're going to be covering the rest of the LTA playoffs. Semifinals is going to get a game-by-game breakdown. Finals is going to get a game-by-game breakdown, but we're doing the other regions as well. We just wrapped up the LEC earlier today. Their finals coverage, the LCK and the LPL, are getting further and further along in their playoffs, and so if you're interested in a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL esports, especially with MSI just around the corner, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all